From the European Parliament here in Brussels, this is Raw Politics. Thank you for joining us, and this is what we have for you on the program tonight. Brexit breakthrough, the draft deal on future ties, who's likely to be pleased and provoked. Add anger as European governments crack down. A French court upholds a controversial campaign. Poland reversal, the sudden decision not to force judges to retire, and will it satisfy Brussels? Black Friday, Europe's love-hate relationship with an American tradition fighting for a foothold. And political red card, why British MPs are being reprimanded for a parliamentary kickabout. All right, it is time to meet our panel for tonight. We have, of course, Darren McCaffrey, our political editor at Euronews. Darren, what are you watching tonight?
I think in some ways quite a significant moment in Poland today, falling into line with that judgment. But the question is it a bit too little, too late? Have enough changes been made that actually it really is just a token gesture? Yeah,
we're paying lip service. Indeed. All right, and we're also joined by Danuta Hübner, a Polish MEP with the EPP. Which of these stories are you watching?
Brexit.
Brexit. We have a lot of Brexit this week. Also joining us tonight is Charles Tannock, a British Conservative MEP with the ECR Group. What about you, Charles?
Well, obviously Brexit, but also a little bit of the Polish one, because the governing party is in my political group, the PIS party.
Also. All right, but we will begin with Brexit today because the blueprint everyone has been waiting for is on the table. The EU and the UK have agreed to a draft declaration on their future relationship. Well, let's go over some of the key points of what it does and what it does not include. First off, no mention of any frictionless trade. It did say that the parties will aim to build and improve on the single customs territory. They will consider new technologies to avoid a hard border in Ireland. And if the post-Brexit transition period is extended, the UK will continue paying into the EU budget. All right, the UK Prime Minister Theresa May commented after the deal was reached, and this is what she had to say.
Last night in Brussels, I had a good, detailed discussion with President Juncker, in which I set out what was needed in that political declaration to deliver for the United Kingdom. We tasked our negotiating teams to continue working overnight. And as a result, the text of that declaration has been agreed between the European Union and the United Kingdom. It is now up to the 27 leaders of the other EU member states to examine this agreement in the days leading up to the special EU Council meeting on Sunday.
All right, so we had that from 7 pages to about 26 pages, Darren. Which of the points stood out to you? We've noted some of them.
Here it is. 26 pages long, as you say. I mean, I think, first of all, rather interesting, we have to accept that after, 18 months of negotiations, whatever you think of the deal, we seem to have one. Both the withdrawal agreement, which is 585 pages long, and this future declaration. And we're told it's going to be ambitious, broad, deep, and a flexible partnership, i.e. this is meant to be a roadmap for what the future ties will look like. Far from it being a dual carriageway, it's almost a super highway. The road is that wide in the sense that, Britain's got incredible flexibility on the way forward after the transition periods, what the future looks like. Will it be essentially UK-Norway style, incredibly aligned and attached within the sphere of the European Union? Or could it be Great Britain Canada Plus style? And I think that's the interesting thing here, is the issue of Northern Ireland, because where this agreement lies, where the withdrawal agreement is, and the commitments that the UK government have made, make a kind of clean Brexit, as some Brexiteers would call it, or others a hard Brexit, very, very difficult now for the whole of the United Kingdom. And that is why I cannot see how the DUP, for example, who are currently propping up Theresa May, could support this.
I think one of the points raised in this the draft text as well is that it's going to be a level playing field for everybody. And this is talking as much to the British part as it is to the Europeans. Is this going to please everybody here? We've already been hearing some rumbles of displeasure. What do you make of this?
On a level playing field, I think all those who know European Union, who function within the European Union, know how important level playing field is, because that means that we have the same approach to state aid policy, to the competition, that we have more or less the same framework for environment, and this is everything that is influencing the competitiveness and coming from the general rules have to be respected, and we have to have the same similar rules at least. That
but do we expect the anger from some of the specific
Why should we have the
countries?
anger? I think I haven't heard any. I think in the last months there was no complaint about the level playing field, because it's important for UK as well to see that also the European market, because Brits will have access to European markets, to see that level playing field is respected by both sides.
What about for the British side? I mean, is this going to, we were talking about even if it were agreed on Sunday, even if everything is signed, sealed, delivered, it might not get through in the UK.
Well, it's interesting that some of the people in the House of Commons opposing the deal have called the original draft proposal a blind Brexit, in which we were paying out £39 billion with no clarity as to what the long-term future framework for trading relationship in the political declaration would actually mean. And I've read it, and I would say if it's not a blind Brexit, it's certainly an impaired vision Brexit, because it's so vague and aspirational. And the one thing that particularly I found strange, it defines what the meaning of the Leave result was in 2016 as specifically saying it meant that Britain had to have its own independent trade policy and there could be no more freedom of movement. So certainly the Norway model would be excluded, because Norway involves freedom of movement. That's how I read it in the European Economic Area. And it also means that eventually, sooner or later, there'll be a problem with Northern Ireland, because we can't stay in the customs union indefinitely as part of the backstop, because we can't have our own independent trade policy. So I think there's going to be real problems in selling this to the House of Commons, to the DUP in particular.
Can I just say that we have to remember that while withdrawal agreement, which was approved at the level of negotiators and by government also in UK a week ago, it is a legal document that is giving legal certainty to everybody who is involved, all the stakeholders.
But this is not binding.
This is a political declaration.
It's an aspiration.
It means it's just the beginning of the negotiations, and then the British side will work on its mandate. We will also work on our mandate, and then we will have negotiations.
Is anybody here worried about how big of a deal Spain will make of the Gibraltar point, for example? Because we're still talking about it.
First of all, it's not in it.
Exactly, which is the problem that they have.
Point. Yeah, it still has to be negotiated. We know the Spanish have said that they are willing not to vote for this, for the deal on Sunday if it comes to it, if Gibraltar is not solved. Now, ultimately, that won't mean the deal won't go through, because Spain does not have a veto on all of this. But clearly, Theresa May is coming back on Saturday. Negotiations are continuing. Will Gibraltar be solved? I don't know. It depends on who moves first. I think, obviously, we have to play the point that there are elections in Andalusia in a couple of weeks' time, and
it's posturing,
there are domestic pressures. I suspect Spain will fall into line. But we will have to wait and see on that.
But please don't forget that over the last month there was extremely in good mood negotiations between UK and Spain, parallelly to the negotiations of the European Union, and we managed to reach sufficient.
But I think it is. I mean, I'm a friend of Gibraltar, but I'm also a strong pro-European. But there can be absolutely no doubt that post-Brexit, in the negotiations for a long-term trading relationship, Spain will have a veto.
Right.
Spain already has a veto. So why do they have to emphasise a veto that the treaty gives them already?
Because it plays well back home.
Well, exactly. It's political posturing. That's my point.
Where does this leave Theresa May? Just very quickly, is she in a good position now?
I think that clearly she has some momentum behind her, but I still can't see the numbers. A whole load of more conservative MPs have come out saying they will vote against the deal, the provisional deal. I just can't see without the DUP's backing, and clearly they haven't got the DUP's backing. Right. And I think Labour will hold the line. I can't see how on the first vote, at least, she can get this through the House of Commons. But then I'm not an MP, I'm an MEP.
Well, for now.
And just to give you a sign of where this is post-publication of this, where Tory discontent still is, on those who have said they're not willing to support it. Priti Patel, these are British MPs. This is a costly surrender by the UK government. Cheryl Murray, this is a betrayal of Brexit. Simon Clarke, ultimately meaningless. Someone else, another British MP. It isn't a settlement, it's a surrender.
Can I suggest that they simply read what has been achieved? It's important.
Well, you know what? The Brexit ball keeps moving from, now it's in Brussels, but then it'll have to go back to London. This is not the only Brexit story that we have tonight. Let's look at tonight's Brexit brief. Rock solid? Think again. Theresa May is struggling to keep her Brexit withdrawal deal afloat amid objections from Spain. Madrid is threatening to hold up progress with a last-minute declaration of concerns over the British overseas territory of Gibraltar. Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez is insistent that the ROC's post-Brexit future must be negotiated between London and Madrid.
Que nos sentimos contrariados, que hemos encontrado en el acuerdo de retirada una serie de elementos, un artículo, el artículo 184, que lo que pone es en cuestión la capacidad que tiene España para poder negociar con el Reino Unido sobre el futuro de Gibraltar. Y eso no es aceptable por el Gobierno de España.
Unacceptable perhaps for Spain, but EU capitals are reportedly less than impressed with Madrid's 11th-hour threat to blow Brexit talks off course. Back in Britain, and Theresa May is once again trying to sweep cabinet leaks to one side. This time, the papers are filled with comments made by her foreign secretary. Jeremy Hunt, who controversially compared the EU to a Soviet prison.
The EU was set up to protect freedom. It was the Soviet Union that stopped people leaving.
Is now reportedly warning that his boss's Brexit deal could put Britain into a Turkey trap. Mr. Hunt is worried that Britain, like Turkey, could face decades of negotiations over its relationship with the EU. And if you thought that the world of football might provide a break from Brexit news, this may come as a blindside. England's Football Association has come up with a post-Brexit proposal to limit the number of non-homegrown players that clubs can include in their senior squads. But this has been tackled by the Premier League, warning that restrictions would not improve England's football teams. Well, there you have it. So we touched on Gibraltar. Which of the other two worry you?
Well, I think football, at the end of the day, I mean, you know, you have good players and these are very rich clubs. They will always be able to buy players and move them around. I'm not particularly concerned in that respect. I am a little concerned about the obvious point made by Jeremy Hunt. Clearly, there's a danger we could be locked into a customs union arrangement almost indefinitely because it depends on finding a technological solution to keeping the Irish border open. Such technology doesn't exist yet. It may never exist. And there's no unilateral way of withdrawing from that, as has been pointed out by the Brexiteers.
But was that a fair comparison, comparing it to the way Turkey is now negotiating with the EU?
It is, in a way, because Turkey's been in the customs union for decades, for a very long time, and it complains that it's in a disadvantage, has no say in the negotiations.
I think we need efforts on both sides, and I think we should appreciate that what has happened so far, that we reached this moment where we really have a deal on the table, and we have the clock continuously ticking, that I think on the British side there should also be reflection. What if not? What if this deal is not approved? What will happen? If we have no deal, there is no transition period. If we have no deal, there is practically a disaster.
David Davis doesn't agree, of course. David Davis, the former Secretary of State for Brexit, thought that we could still do a deal in the transitional period without a deal.
Can you imagine a situation, what kind of trust we would have for the negotiating the future with somebody with whom we didn't manage to agree on a withdrawal, which is on an orderly based on some...
It's a shambles, let's be honest.
I think the only thing we can agree on is that whether it's called the Turkey trap or not, that Europe has dominated British political life for the last 40, 50 years.
And will
carry on doing so. And unfortunately, we'll probably go on.
But that was Cameron's biggest mistake, wasn't it? That was Cameron's biggest mistake.
Can of worms right now.
Yeah, but I think they should have some confidence in themselves, the Brits, and just the beginning of the negotiation. Really, what matters is the future. It's not. We have
that is exactly what's going to happen on Sunday. I mean, that is the blueprint. It is going to be the beginning of a long process of negotiations, indeed, and we're keeping an eye on that. All right. In another move that could be seen as a win for the EU now, let's move on to Poland, because it has moved to reinstate Supreme Court judges they had previously forced into early retirement. The country's ruling Law and Justice Party is now fast-tracking a bill to reverse its decision to lower the retirement age for judges, saying that it respected a recent order by the European Court of Justice to do so. The original reforms sparked mass protests and were largely seen as a way for the populist government to stack the Supreme Court with government loyalists.
Trybunał Sprawiedliwości jest to instytucją nadrzędną. My szanujemy. Też stosujemy się do terminów. Nie komentujemy, że jest późno te posiedzenie piątkowe, że nie ma jeszcze tego wyroku ostatecznego, więc dajmy tutaj szansę na jakby zajęcie tego stanowiska w taki sposób, że jak powiedziałem, nie mamy tego orzeczenia ostatecznego. Nieformalnie się dowiedzieliśmy. Trybunał wysłuchał naszych racji, ale nie wiemy, jaka jest reakcja. Nieformalnie słyszymy, czy też czytamy, że może do świąt będzie to orzeczenie.
All right, well, joining us, we have a new panelist for this is Brian McGuire. He's a reporter with Euractiv.com. All right, Brian, I'll start with you. Our new guest for this panel. Is this a win for the EU?
This is a win for Poland.
Is it?
This is a win for Poland because I think they've played this pretty well. They've given the EU something that they can say, well, we forced you to back down. But actually, the Polish government now has control of virtually the whole judiciary. At the moment, there's a fast-track process for all new judges to be retired early. The Justice Minister is also the Prosecutor General. He controls the appointment of virtually all the judges, including the Constitutional Tribunal, which has a power of veto over legislation and the power over other appointments of judges as well. Kaczynski controls virtually the whole judicial machinery now.
So this is not a result of, the EU trying to get Poland in line, is it? I mean, what do you think, Charles?
Well, I mean, I think it is. It's a kind of cosmetic victory whereby everybody thinks they can walk away and say something positive. Poland is still seen as a country that observes the rule of law and is enforcing a judgment or preliminary judgment of the ECJ. At the same time, the reality on the ground is that Mr. Zobrio is the Prosecutor General. He's a Minister of Justice. The judges have been significantly changed, and I think Madam Gersdorf, who's the Supreme Court judge, she is already 65 or 66. She will be able to serve out her 6-year tenure.
But also, I think at the end of the day, isn't it domestic politics that matter the most? Because I think that this comes off the back of lower than expected results in October.
They're not doing
regional,
so well.
they're not doing well.
There's a general election next year.
Yeah.
They have dropped back in the polls. I think they're only down to 7% lead. Now, clearly that does matter, and we all know that this row with Europe has not played well domestically. So that will have been an influence, I think, in this decision. But ultimately, as these guys have pointed out, not much substantially will have actually changed. And also, these judges do a 6-year tenure, which in the grand scheme of things means that in a couple of years' time, they will not be there anyway.
So if we extend it to the other countries that the EU is trying to get in line, you don't think that anyone is going to take the EU seriously in this case, because none of them have, actually.
Well, I think Hungary is another example of playing this kind of game. And in the end, with the exception of migration, virtually all the rulings that Hungary was required to comply with, they complied with in the end. So a lot of this is, like we say, posturing for elections which are coming up. They're playing to their home audience. They don't really play the same game when they're sitting in committee rooms or face-to-face with commissioners.
So how does the EU, how will the EU deal with that?
Well, I mean, in fairness, they are buying time, but at the same time, it's interesting in the Brexit negotiations, none of these countries, which the United Kingdom thought would be their strongest allies, and would all fall apart.
Turned out to be.
It turns out that this was a dog that never barked in the Salzburg summit. Neither Hungary, nor Poland, nor Italy with Salvini, none of them came to Mrs. May's defence. So it's quite clear that the cohesion of the bloc ultimately is pretty robust, in spite of different views on immigration, particularly on the issue of the quotas for refugees and so on. But so they will sort of try and massage it and try and move on and buy some time. So I think in a sort of funny way, both the EU comes out positively, and also the Polish government's done quite well.
The Polish government also, everybody said today, we will respect this ruling because we're good Europeans.
Exactly. There you go.
Okay, it's like push-pull and then posturing, and then here we go, come to this conclusion. All right, coming up still on Raw Politics, a lot more fighting fake news or an assault on free speech. We'll tell you about a controversial new law in France. Plus, a controversial poster saying it says 1,000 words, but none of them promote violence against women. That's according to a French court. The politics of controversial ad campaigns, that's coming up next. Welcome back to Our Politics. A French court has ruled that an advert in the town of Béziers did not promote violence against women. The posters promoting the arrival of high-speed trains show a woman tied down to train tracks with a caption reading, "With a TGV, she would have suffered less." That's the high-speed train. Now, the campaign came 4 months after a woman was tied to rail tracks by her husband and hit by a train in northern France. But Béziers' far-right mayor Robert Ménard defended his campaign in a tweet, saying, "Must we also ban the thousands of depictions of femicide in cinema, cartoons, and music videos?" Now, although that advert was deemed legally acceptable, a string of others in recent months were controversially banned. This advert for a dating website matching younger women to wealthier older men was banned from Brussels for inciting prostitution. The minister who imposed the ban described it as, quote, "pimping 2.0. In September, Sweden's advertising watchdog deemed this viral meme gender discriminatory after internet service provider Bahnhof used it to promote their job search service. And the British Ombudsman faced a storm of abuse for banning this ad, which it said was too political. It uses an animated orangutan to highlight a UK supermarket's decision to divest in palm oil, a product said to contribute to the endangered apes' declining numbers.
What to do? They're burning it for palm oil.
All right, joining me in the studio for a closer look at this is Laura Shields. She is a PR and messaging expert and the director of Red Thread Communications. We have Sirpa Petikainen, a Finnish MEP from the National Coalition Party, part of the EPP group, and Lucas Boudet, who's the Director General at the European Advertising Standards Alliance. All right, I'd like to go back to the French ad. Where do you, Laura, where do you stand on this when you look at this advertising?
Well, when I look at it, I'm personally horrified, but more because I think it's crass and insensitive in light of the murder that took place of that young woman in recent months. In terms of the ban itself, or the attempt to get it banned because it was inciting violence to women, I'm more neutral on that because I'm not sure that it does. But what I do think is that the mayor has been able to game this absolutely brilliantly, because not only has he had the primary benefit where everybody now knows where this town is, who he is, and also that the TGV goes there, but on top of that, the outrage factory means that he's suddenly turned this into an identity war where, between gender, I think he called them, it was inquisition by petticoats. He's turned it into political correctness gone mad, and the PR hit that he's getting from this has created a massive ripple effect.
Is there a legitimate argument to what the mayor was saying that, okay, should we now start banning everything else?
Well, this is what the populists usually say, but we all recognize bad taste and a good taste, human rights and non-human rights when we meet them. And so far, quite often the self-regulatory mechanism in advertising has dealt with that, sort of internally setting the limits, what you do not do. But once in a while, they go over the board. And then, yes, I think that we should intervene. And this is actually, that is not an excuse that someone has had bad habits before. Yeah. And I think that that was a correct decision.
Well, the court has said it is legally acceptable. But from the advertising industry, do you think there are points like this where it is pushed to it goes beyond the limit that is acceptable?
So I think these two things. First of all, this public upfront a specific case, because through social media, we talk more and more about specific cases. But in general, there's existing self-regulatory rules that date back to over 80 years that regulate exactly this kind of topics. And in this specific case, if I'm right, it's actually the French self-regulatory organization that took a position in it, and actually based on the fact that political advertising is out of its remit. So it's not the court specifically.
So do you think that it is the advertising industry who should police themselves, or that or governments have a right to say, wait, this is too much?
So the ad industry is already effectively policing itself. Here it's not specifically in the remit of the ad industry's area, because it's political advertising.
So you think that is it the government's place actually to be doing that?
It is actually, when it is advertising, it is, and I think it should be remits on advertising. And as long as it functions well and it self-regulates and reacts on cases that should have not happened, and that goes well with advertising with children and stuff like that, we do not need any more harsh regulatory actions. But if that fails, then we do need that, but it's always more difficult to police it later on in court cases.
And Laura, to the point that you were making, that the banning of it actually helps the cause of people who want to get attention.
Well, absolutely. I mean, you also showed the palm oil ad. So, that was banned, but everybody now knows where that is because they were able to put it out on social media.
But people were angry that it was banned. So this was like the reverse of the...
This is precisely the point, is then you're gaming it. So there's a ripple effect. So it's the 1-2 punch. The first one is that you try and you create the story, then you get the story banned. Now, I'm not saying that was deliberate by any means, but you feed off the uproar that goes with it. So as a result of that, it actually makes much more publicity for the story in question. I mean, Greenpeace has been very effective at doing this in the past. They've clashed with Nestle on this.
So this is an actual strategy that people use. You push it too much to the point.
I'm not saying it's deliberate in this case, but it's a little bit like when Lady Chatterley's Lover first came out. That was banned, and book sales went through the roof, and people were suddenly people started talking about it. And there was the court case for I think they banned it for being obscene. So this is part of the challenge around it, is that if you want to contain a story, don't ban it, don't shut it down, because actually you have precisely the opposite effect.
So this is not a question of freedom of speech versus censorship. Is this not the discussion that's supposed to be had here?
It's a part of it, but I think it's more of this, and we know that there's even more competition about our time in social media and press, and so advertisers are trying to get our attention, and that is the risk, that it sort of pushes this kind of advertisement, sort of testing the limit, because then you have a shocking effect, everybody talks about, you get the notice, and it sort of triples the effect, and that is the self-control that should contain that kind of a phenomenon.
Do you find that in the industry, that there is a push to push the limit?
Well, I think that most of the advertising is truthful, legal, honest and decent. Here there's a few cases that we take out and make noise around it, but overall the industry is committed to ensuring responsible advertising. For example, our network handles over 65,000 complaints every year, 80,000 ads actually pre-cleared, or these opinions rendered before they go out. So these are checks and balances throughout the process. And some,
I think, yeah, go ahead.
Also, some examples can be pulled out, but overall, I would say these systems that are in place and are efficient.
And I think that's very interesting. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, no, all I was going to say was that I think...
Give you the last word.
Well, I think what's interesting in this is that you talk about several ads that have been banned, and sometimes it seems to me that the criteria, when they get banned, it's not clear why. You know, what makes something political? I'm not sure that we ever really know, you know, who's deciding what it is.
And where do you draw the line? I mean, that always is the question, where is the line? All right, it's time for today's Power Play. It's all about a backlash against a very American phenomenon which is growing in Europe. Let's take a look.
Ready? Yeah.
Black Friday. It might just drive you to despair. Bargain mad shoppers literally falling over each other just to get 40% off a television. The American phenomenon is linked to Thanksgiving, and even though Europe does not mark this holiday, Black Friday has been creeping onto its continent in recent years, with sales increasing by 32% in Europe last year, but not everyone is happy about it. In France, Greenpeace has launched a counter-campaign calling on Europeans to ditch the bargain-fueled chaos in favor of getting active and spending time with family and friends. I think that first image encapsulates what Black Friday is, in our heads. But then there's, again, we're talking about messaging. So you were shaking your heads when you were looking at that. Is it a good thing, a bad thing? Black Friday, it's a sale.
Well, it's good for your wallet, but it's bad for the planet. We are already consuming 1.5 planets every year, and so we really should think carefully what to buy, and buy quality and, of course, good price if possible, but not just to rush and buy anything.
But what about this idea that this is so American? Do you think that's something that people think about, in France especially?
Well, brands, companies are getting more global, so they have global approaches. We can think about Halloween, for example, that was kind of introduced to Europe.
So there's no more resistance to something American?
Not necessarily. I think that it's a balance. There's a try to use a phenomenon to promote products. Then there'll be a response of society, which can be that harsh. But also, I think a balance will happen throughout time.
But very quickly, Laura, should there be a different messaging when it comes to Black Friday in Europe?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think that if it's going to work, it'll work on the same basis, which is that everybody likes a bargain. I mean, I'm half American, and I've actually just come back from the States, and I was there for Halloween. And I can assure you that even while people go a bit crazy for Halloween here, it's nothing like in the States. So even if we get Black Friday here, it's not going to be like it is in...
No one is going to die on it.
There you go. So there you go. Maybe the sale is actually quite good there. All right. After the break, coming up on Raw Politics, how's this for direct democracy at play? How one Swiss farmer is having a cow over the removal of his animal's horns that has led to a unique referendum that the country must now vote on. Well, more on this story coming up. Welcome back to Raw Politics. So the French Parliament has passed a law it hopes will help tackle the influence of fake news on elections. But some think that the law itself is a threat to democracy. Alex Morgan in The Cube has the latest on this. Alex, what is the story?
Tessa, France versus fake news. That's how the proponents of this change in the law would like you to see it, putting the onus on social media platforms we use every single day, Facebook, Twitter, WhatsApp, Instagram, putting the onus on them to make sure the information we are getting, especially around election time, is fair and accurate. Now, there's a lot to this law. It is complicated. Let me just break down perhaps some of the key parts of it. Well, it's all to do with the information we are seeing and knowing who it is coming from. So this law obliges platforms to make it clear to you and I to pull back the curtains and say who is paying for content to be promoted on their platforms and publicly to declare how much they are paying. We're also allowed now to know how our information is being used, perhaps to make sure this content is targeted in targeted paid-for advertising campaigns. Now then it comes down to algorithms, those mysterious algorithms that control what we see and how we see it. Now, as you can see, it's hard to keep an eye on those things. But the important thing about algorithms is that now there will be an onus on the platforms to explain what we see, in what order and why, to pull back the curtain there as well. There's also an element about television here too. It gives the French National Broadcasting Agency the right to suspend foreign television channels if they are broadcasting information that, to quote this new law, threatens the sincerity and the integrity of the ballot. All of this relates to national elections and the 3-month period before them, right up to the day of the vote. Now, for Emmanuel Macron, the French president himself, who was trolled during his presidential campaign, he says this is the condition of a free and fair internet as seen by the founding fathers. But that is not how it was seen by opponents. This was rejected twice by the French Senate in a ping-pong between the French Senate and the Parliament, eventually passed in Parliament. But the critics, they are still very much out there. This is what they've been saying. This was Julien Rochedy. He's a former National Front member. He says, well, that's it. We're back to the 1930s now. The French state has given itself a monopoly on truth. And when it comes to the foreign media, well, Russia Today says it is them and Sputnik, two Russian state-backed channels that are the targets of this new law, saying it's in an article saying, is France sliding into democracy? Welcome to democracy, question mark, is that article. So Tessa, controversial inside of France, controversial outside of France. The test for this new law will be, with the European elections coming up, how it works not inside a parliament chamber, but out here in the real world and in the timelines of you and I.
Thank you for that, Alex and the Cube team. All right. Joining us for this discussion is the Telegraph's Brussels correspondent James Griffiths, and still with us is Finnish MEP with the National Coalition Party Sirpa Pietikäinen, and Laura Shields, a PR and messaging expert, director of Red Thread Communications. James, since you're new on this panel, I'll start with you. Is this going the right direction?
You know, I'm not sure. I think really, rather than coming down on the regulation side of things, I mean, maybe we just need to step back and all realise that you can't really trust anything you read on the internet. But basically, if you're getting your news from Facebook, if you're getting it from Twitter, you need to treat it with caution. And if you don't treat it with caution...
So the responsibility is on the individual and there's nothing that can be done on the other side?
Well, no, there can be stuff, but I'd always prefer the responsibility to be on the individual than the responsibility to be on, shall we say, Emmanuel Macron or French MPs.
All right. You were talking earlier in our previous subject about governments having to step in. Is this a case of governments having to step in?
Yes, I think we need to act civil to form a civilization. And internet isn't in another space or galaxy. So I think the format is, can you trust anything I read on a newspaper?
Yes.
Yes. Because there's a law in place, there's the editorial responsibility, and basically it is the same question. You put the editorial responsibility on platforms. You have to check that you are not part of the hate speech, or that is not outrageously lie what you are spreading around. And that is not the nitty-gritty, and already the algorithms are doing a lot of work so they can manage with this one very well too.
But I mean, but newspapers are businesses. I mean, that's true, but there is at least a sort of an ideal where some people working in newspapers would like to feel that they have a duty to inform. I don't think that Facebook or Twitter feels that duty at all.
But we feel that they have a duty to act accordingly.
Laura, is this a slippery slope when it comes to who is controlling and who is deciding? These are human beings still who are calling the shots, making those decisions.
I have pretty strong views on this because I do think that information or quality information has to be the lifeblood of liberal democracy. And I think that everything that you read about disinformation and fake news suggests that what it's designed to do is to exacerbate existing divisions in countries. So I do think some kind of firm action needs to be taken. What bothers me is that I don't think it should be left in the hands of politicians. I think it needs to be a much wider group. The criteria for what counts as fake facts, and I think this is key. It's fake facts, not fake opinions.
Exactly.
Needs to be extremely
it's not
transparent.
Something we agree or disagree with.
And also,
exactly.
What also bothers me actually is that given the speed with which this stuff can circulate, getting it banned may not actually achieve anything, because by the time it's got to the point where it's circulating it around, it'll have done enough damage.
Right.
So whilst I think that some action does need to be taken, I think you've got to try lots of different things, because at the moment nobody really knows how to fight this.
And if the target, as Alex was saying, that some foreign channels say that they are actually the target, if that is indeed the target, does this law is it even effective?
I'm not going to comment on this because I'm not familiar in details about the law, but about the principle, sort of the equation with this kind of editorial responsibility should be laid down there and acted accordingly. And then it is, of course, interpretation case by case, like it is with the normal old-fashioned media, what is to be considered fact or not. And this is not the nitty-gritty issues. It is about these gross attempts to impact our policy and political life.
Obviously, fact is fact. What's black is black, black and white. But when there are things that can be open to interpretation, where do you draw the line on that? When what one may call fake news is something they don't agree with.
Well, it's a difficult line to draw. I mean, it's a very difficult line to draw.
How do you do it in newspaper?
You make an informed decision after speaking to a number of sources.
Right, but this is what's an interesting point, is that all the neuroscience shows that actually we don't share what is true, we share what is compelling, and that is the big challenge of the social networks. So in this sense, I don't think most people can be trusted. I mean, there's an example from India where there was a WhatsApp group in various rural communities, and there was
led to killings.
Yes, led to killings,
right.
exactly, because it was fake news about suspected paedophiles. So this is, taking it with a pinch of salt, yes, but the point is this comes back to trust, and it also comes back to what we instinctly go with, and I think we do need to manage that.
But it's a great challenge.
Yeah, as it rolls out, I think we will see how it impacts the upcoming elections, because that is the reason why I think generally it was put into place in the first place. All right, now I want to move on and take you to the Alpine nation of Switzerland, because an unassuming farmer has captured the public debate. That's today's Eurostars. Taking the bull by the horns. If you're from Switzerland, you've got a big decision to make this weekend. A referendum that has been 8 years in the making is being held on whether to subsidize farmers who let their cows' horns grow naturally. 3/4 of Swiss cows, a symbol of the Alpine nation, are dehorned or genetically hornless. It's become a national talking point thanks to this man. A self-described rebel, Armin Kapol, hopes to reduce dehorning.
Die Kuh gibt uns Nahrung. Und wir sollten die Kuh als solche respektieren, ihre Würde lassen. Wenn Sie die Kühe anschauen, die haben den Kopf immer hoch, die sind stolz. Und wenn wir die wegmachen, dann sind sie traurig. Oder?
We'll have to wait until Sunday to discover whether Swiss voters ring in the changes at the ballot box. I mean, the Swiss have a lot of referendums. This is one of those examples. So is this democracy in action, or have referendums gone too far in Switzerland? What do you think?
Well, I'm really looking forward to the huge divides that I expect to open up in Swiss society as its society sort of crumbles in the face of this major issue. How long does the government have? Who knows? We're all waiting for the political declaration. Or, maybe I'm milking this, or is it just being...
The cow's going to trigger Article 50.
Utterly ridiculous.
Utterly ridiculous.
But you were happy about this case.
5 stars for the farmer and for the cows.
Quite a hero he is.
And in theory, they seem to work very well, the referendums in Switzerland. About Great Britain, I'm not so sure.
I was going to say, this comes on to the point. I mean, I think whilst I think this is a fairly trivial example, and that's probably got better things to do with their time. The Swiss do know how to run referenda. Those people will be extremely well informed.
Some were saying that on Sundays they would go to
boring Switzerland is.
Oh, okay, so we should make a political decision with no information but bendy bananas.
Well, UK is much more exciting. You never know.
See, that opened up a really nice debate there. All right, still to come on Raw Politics. A new headache for Chancellor Angela Merkel after her education minister voiced disapproval over Germany's legalization of same-sex marriage. Don't go away. Welcome back to Raw Politics. German Chancellor Angela Merkel is dealing with some unwanted dissent within her party, just hours after she gave an impassioned speech in the Bundestag urging togetherness over division. Two high-ranking members of her party made controversial comments on immigration and gay marriage. So first off, leadership hopeful Friedrich Merz, this is what he said.
Ich bin schon seit langer Zeit der Meinung, dass wir bereit sein müssten, über dieses Asylgrundrecht offen zu reden, ob es in dieser Form fortbestehen kann, wenn wir ernsthaft eine europäische Einwanderungs- und Flüchtlingspolitik wollen. Wahlkampfzeiten sind wahrscheinlich für eine solche Debatte ungeeignet. Aber wir müssen irgendwann auch einmal eine große öffentliche Diskussion über die Frage führen, wenn wir denn eine Lösung in Europa wollen.
Well, it did not stop there. The education minister is under fire for comments on gay marriage. Anja Karliczek questioned whether legalization was rushed, and she said the effect of two same-sex parents on children was unknown. Well, speaking to German news channel NTV, she said, I think the way we did it was not right, as long as children are being bullied or discriminated against in schools or in any way, as long as we have a problem. All right. Joining us to talk about this, we have again Brian McGuire, reporter with Euractiv, our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, still with us is the Daily Telegraph's Brussels correspondent, James Crisp. All right, what is going on in Germany? You were chuckling when you were hearing.
Well, I loved the way the first guy said, you know, now isn't really the time to talk about this. It wouldn't be helpful before going on to talk about it. I mean, I'm not sure, you know, German's a fantastic language. I'm sure that they've already got a verb, a compound long verb, which means to slowly mimic Trump in a bid to soak up a few extra votes because your leader is tottering.
But is that what's happening? Is this the reflection of rhetoric? That
it is complete rhetoric, because both of these situations are things which are established in law which can't be changed.
Exactly.
And the first guy, Merz, he's talking about changing something which is in the basic law, but not just in the basic law. It has what's called an eternity clause. You have to change the whole constitution and not just this one bit. He can't deliver that. And also on the same-sex parenting as well, it's 0.1% of German families have underage children with same-sex parents. That is not of great consequence to most of the German electorate. This is all about positioning for new jobs in the next cabinet.
I think what's interesting is a reminder of how much immigration is still a massive issue in Germany and continues to taint the CDU. And it is something that the party feels they need to get to grips with. But also, and this seems a bit weird because, you know, we're from the UK or Ireland and elsewhere in Europe, where kind of religion doesn't play a part in the national narrative. I'm not saying it doesn't.
Ireland?
No, but as in like party political-wise, it doesn't. Like leaders don't need to pretend to be Christian if they are or they aren't. What was that famous thing that Alistair Campbell once said? We don't do religion. Whereas when I was at the EPP conference in Helsinki a few weeks ago, when Manfred Weber stood up, of course the CDU is part of the EPP, he's from the CSU, but the biggest round of applause was when he talked about Christian heritage in Europe. Right. When he talked about how the fact that every village, town and city had a church. I mean, there was almost a standing ovation.
It was in his video as well.
And there is a Christian vote. I'm saying there's a Christian constituency that clearly the CDU appeal to.
Yes, but the Christian thing to do would be to take in refugees and help them. I mean, that is what Jesus would do. Jesus would probably also not have a problem. Well, on the gay adoption, I'm not sure, but Jesus ever said anything to do with it.
This is important,
I'm pretty sure he wouldn't have an issue with
for salvation. You can't. We don't want to be in a theocracy. This is a democracy.
So is all of this a moot point? Because as you say, it can't be changed.
It's an insight. It's an insight into the fact that there are constituencies in Germany on these two very issues. It's clearly a leadership campaign.
It's two chances on the make.
I think that's pretty accurate.
Two chances on the make, but then you know you've got members of the supposedly centrist party towing lines that are normally given to the far right.
Well, they're not. First of all, we learned from the Bavarian election, mimicking the far right costs you votes, doesn't gain you votes.
Right.
And the German electorate is broadly sensitive to that as well. So this is, I think, an internal party positioning. Like we just said, it's not going to have any real impact on overall policy. It will show some sympathy and will receive some sympathy from Hungary and places like that. But will this change German policy?
I think we should move away. We shouldn't say this is the far right.
No.
First of all, Germany is the only country in the world to have this law on asylum seekers. And second of all, you know, I'd say it is not just the far right that might have concerns about gay adoption. That is something that
is
found in wide spheres of the electorate in lots of other countries.
I mean, one thing I just would say about Germany, and this is an unpopular point of view, especially at the moment, but I think Germany demands huge sort of respect and gratitude from the rest of Europe for actually taking in 1 million refugees and asylum seekers. You know, they took that onto that burden, if you like, burden. You know, you could argue that once they're integrated, once they're working, it'll actually be a boon to the society. But, you know, they took that on. And I think that was actually a brave move by Angela Merkel, the right moral choice. And it's probably...
I was just going to say, in this discussion, we hardly mentioned Angela Merkel.
Yeah, Merkel, she was speaking just before these comments were made about the United Nations Migration Pact as well, a global arrangement for how we deal with migration. But her parties bring this back down to a very parochial level as well. And also, we just mentioned morality of this. You know, as Darren said, the religious element of this, there is a strong pattern across the whole of Europe. And when we speak about being tolerant as well, there has to be a tolerance on the other side. And I think this is going to be something the right to speak up within Germany. And both of these issues, I have a right to speak about migration if you don't like it. I have a right to speak about these other issues if you don't like it as well. That could be the more serious
What's interesting is if we continue to see rhetoric like this coming from Germany. All right, it's now time for tonight's Raw Moment. A British MP is in hot water for shaking up an ancient institution. Let's take a look. That was SNP MP Hannah Bardell there. She was showing off her footy skills and promoting the women's parliamentary football team. But the Commons Speaker, he was not impressed. In a statement, John Bercow said, "I think I can speak for us all when I say that our historic chamber should not be used for this type of activity. And I gently remind colleagues if they're seeking to use the chamber outside of sitting hours, they should write to me and asking for their requests to be considered." All right, is he a spoil sport? Should he just...
Yes. Well, I think had she kept it up 20, had she kept the ball up 20 times, we'd be talking about her ball skill, not the lack of it.
I don't know which is more. More outrageous the fact that she was awful. It was awful. To be fair, I cannot do it either, so I should not criticise. But you know, I think there's a time and a place to play football, essentially, and it should not be... Like, my mother, if I started doing this in my mother's living room or sitting room, she would go mad. And I think John Bercow, he is the Speaker of the House after all, maybe a controversial one, but he is, and he's got a right to say this is not appropriate.
This is not the least dignified thing in the House of Commons.
Exactly, this is the idea that the House of Commons is some sort of stuffy, sacred space where everyone goes by the rules, and there's never any breaches of etiquette. I mean, you look at Prime Minister's question time.
There are rules in place, and he didn't sanction it. I just don't think it's appropriate. I mean,
well, there you have it.
Kick a football, go and kick it outside.
Darren. Darren's so passionate about this. All right, thank you for joining us tonight on Raw Politics. So we'd like you to get in touch with us. I'm on Twitter at Tessa Arcilia. You can follow us on Twitter as well at Euronews and use the hashtag Raw Politics. Have a good evening and bye for now.